The rain fell mercilessly across the Montana territory as Lillian Evans stood alone before her father's grave, her wedding dress now a sodden mess of silk and lace that clung to her shivering frame. The year was 1876, and what should have been the happiest day of her life had turned into a nightmare when her groom never appeared at the small church in Helena. Now, with nowhere else to turn, she had fled to the only place that offered any solace, the fresh grave of the man who had raised her with nothing but love and kindness. Xavier Young spotted the figure in white from a distance, his horse slowing instinctively as they approached the cemetery. He pulled his hat lower against the downpour, squinting through the sheets of rain. At first, he thought she might be a ghost. Those sorts of tales were common enough in these parts, but as he drew closer, he could see she was flesh and blood, and clearly in terrible distress. He dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby fence post before approaching carefully. His spurs clinked softly with each step, but the bride seemed not to notice, lost as she was in her grief. "Madam," he called gently, stopping a respectful distance away, "you'll catch your death out here." Lillian turned, her face streaked with tears that mingled with the rain. Her golden hair, once elaborately styled, now hung in wet tangles around her shoulders. "What difference would it make?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. "There's nothing left for me now." Xavier removed his duster and stepped forward, draping it around her shoulders without asking permission. The gesture was automatic, born from years of looking after others. "I reckon that ain't true," he said simply. "Rain stops eventually, always does." She looked up at him then, really seeing him for the first time, a tall man with kind eyes the color of whiskey, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and shoulders broad enough to suggest he was used to carrying heavy burdens. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the men in town, but there was something steadfast about him that made her pause. "My father is dead," she said flatly. "My groom abandoned me at the altar. My home will be seized for debts by week's end." "Tell me, sir, what exactly should I be looking forward to?" Xavier didn't flinch at her sharp tone. "Can't say I know, madam, but standing in a graveyard during a thunderstorm don't seem like the answer." He nodded toward the road. "My cabin's not far, you can dry off at least." "Have some hot coffee," Lillian laughed bitterly. "You think I should go alone to a stranger's cabin? What kind of woman do you take me for? The kind that's got enough sense not to die of exposure," he replied evenly. "But suit yourself, I'll leave you the coat." He tipped his hat and turned to go. "Wait," she called, surprising herself. "I don't even know your name." He turned back, rainwater streaming off the brim of his hat. "Xavier Young, most folks call me X. Lillian Evans," she replied, clutching his coat tighter around herself. "Most folks call me Lily." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Miss Evans, I give you my word as a gentleman, I mean you no harm, just offering shelter from the storm." She hesitated, looking back at her father's grave. What would he advise her to do? Stay here and catch pneumonia, or trust this stranger with the kind eyes? "Very well, Mr. Young, I accept your offer of shelter." Xavier nodded, then surprised her by removing his bandana and offering it to her. "For your eyes," he explained, "if you're of a mind to dry them." The simple gesture nearly undid her. She accepted the bandana, dabbing at her face while he pretended not to notice, giving her a moment of privacy despite the open cemetery around them. "My horse is just over yonder," he said when she'd composed herself. "She's gentle enough to carry us both if you don't mind sharing the saddle." Lillian nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond words. She allowed Xavier to help her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her, his arms forming a protective circle as he reached for the reins. She should have felt scandalized at the impropriety, but instead found herself leaning back slightly against his solid chest, grateful for the warmth and stability he offered. They rode in silence through the rain, Lillian too, emotionally drained to make conversation, and Xavier seemingly content with the quiet. His cabin appeared after about 20 minutes, a modest but well-maintained structure with smoke curling from the chimney and a small covered porch. "You left a fire going?" she asked, finding her voice as he helped her down from the horse. "My dog knows how to keep it stoked," he answered, and as if on cue, a large brown mutt with one ear flopped over appeared at the cabin door, tail wagging. "That's Buck. He won't bother you none." Lillian stepped onto the porch, watching as Xavier quickly saw to his horse, removing the saddle and leading the animal to a small lean-to shelter beside the cabin. Everything about the scene spoke of routine and care. This was a man who looked after what was his. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and some basic furnishings. A curtain separated what she presumed was his sleeping area. "I'll heat some water for coffee," Xavier said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "There's a blanket on that chair if you want to wrap up in something dry. I'd offer you clothes, but I expect they'd swallow you whole." Lillian managed a weak smile at that. "Thank you, Mr. Young, you're very kind. Just if you don't mind, never been much for formalities." She nodded, settling into a chair near the fire and wrapping the offered blanket around her shoulders after removing his duster. Buck padded over and laid his head on her knee, looking up with soulful eyes. "He's friendly," Xavier commented, putting a kettle on the stove. "Found him half-starved about 2 years back. Now he thinks he owns the place." "You live here alone?" she asked, then blushed at the forwardness of the question. "Yep, just me and Buck." He moved with efficient ease around the small space, gathering cups and coffee. "Used to ride with a cattle outfit, but decided I preferred my own company. Do odd jobs now, breaking horses, mostly, some hunting and trapping in winter." "I see." She stroked Buck's head, finding comfort in the simple action. "And you just happened to be riding by the cemetery today." Xavier paused, then continued his preparations. "No, madam, I go there regular. My wife and baby girl are buried 2 rows over from where you were standing." Lillian's heart sank. "I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. Been 5 years now," he said quietly. "Fever took them both within a week of each other. I still bring flowers when I can find good ones." She watched him, seeing past his stoic expression to the grief that still lingered beneath. "That's why you stopped," she realized. "You know what it's like." He nodded, bringing her a steaming cup of coffee. "Reckon I do, though I suspect your story's different from mine." Lillian wrapped her cold fingers around the warm cup, finding comfort in its heat. "My father raised me alone after my mother died. He was everything to me. When he fell ill last month, the doctor's bills mounted quickly. Thomas, my fiancé, offered marriage as a solution. His family has money and he seemed kind enough. But he didn't show today," Xavier finished for her. "No, his father sent a message instead. Said Thomas had reconsidered, that he couldn't tie himself to a family with so many debts." She laughed bitterly. "As if I didn't know that was the real reason he proposed in the first place. The bank will take our home and the mercantile by next week. I have nowhere to go." Xavier sipped his coffee, considering her words. "What skills do you have, Miss Evans?" The question surprised her. "I can read and write well. I kept the books for my father's store. I can sew, cook decent enough meals. Nothing special, I'm afraid." "Reading and writing are plenty special out here," he observed. "The ranch where I sometimes work is looking for a schoolteacher for the owner's kids and some of the hands' children. Pays room and board plus wages." Lillian blinked in surprise. "You think they would consider me?" "I have no formal training as a teacher. Formal training ain't high on their list of requirements. Being able to read, write, and not run screaming from a pack of wild youngsters is about all they're hoping for." He offered a small smile. "I could put in a word if you're interested." She studied him, trying to understand his motivation. "Why would you help me, X? You don't know me at all," he shrugged, his gaze drifting to the fire. "Maybe I know enough. You were saying goodbye to someone you loved, wearing a dress meant for beginnings, not endings. Seems to me life's already been hard enough on you without adding pneumonia to your troubles." A strange warmth spread through Lillian's chest that had nothing to do with the coffee or the fire. "I would be grateful for the introduction," she said softly. "And for a place to stay tonight if the offer still stands." "It does." He rose to his feet. "I'll sleep in the lean-to with the horses. You and Buck can have the cabin." "I couldn't possibly put you out of your own home," she protested. "Ain't the first time I've slept with my horse, Miss Evans." "Won't be the last." His tone brooked no argument. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you started fresh." As the evening progressed, Xavier prepared a simple but filling meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. Lillian insisted on helping, and they worked together in comfortable silence, moving around each other in the small space with surprising ease. After they ate, he showed her where everything was, then prepared to leave for the night. At the door, he paused. "Buck'll let you know if anyone approaches, but you're safe here. Nobody comes this way much." "Thank you," she said sincerely. "For everything." He nodded once, then slipped out into the night, leaving Lillian alone with her thoughts and a dog who seemed determined to be her new best friend. Morning brought clear skies and birdsong. Lillian woke to find fresh clothing, a simple dress that must have belonged to Xavier's late wife, laid carefully outside the door, along with a basin of clean water. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to her eyes. When she emerged from the cabin dressed in the slightly too large dress, she found Xavier tending to his horse, his back to her. The morning light caught in his dark hair, showing threads of silver at the temples she hadn't noticed before. "Good morning," she called softly. He turned, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in the sight of her in his wife's dress. "Morning. Hope you don't mind found that packed away. Thought it might be more comfortable than your wedding dress." "It's perfect, thank you." She smoothed the simple blue fabric. "I can return it before I leave." "Keep it," he said quickly, then softened his tone. "Sarah would have wanted someone to use it." Lillian nodded, understanding the gift for what it was, a step forward for them both. "When do we leave for the ranch?" "After breakfast, if that suits." "It's a few hours' ride." He gestured toward the cabin. "Coffee's hot if you want some." They ate a quick meal of leftover cornbread and coffee, then prepared to leave. Xavier helped her onto his horse again, but this time arranged a proper saddle for her to sit sideways while he would lead the horse on foot. "You don't have to walk," she protested. "My legs work just fine," he replied with a small smile. "Besides, gives Buck a chance to run off some energy." The journey to the ranch took them through stunning countryside, rolling hills covered in spring wildflowers, stands of pine trees, and crystal-clear streams. Xavier pointed out landmarks along the way, naming plants and animals with the easy knowledge of someone who had spent his life outdoors. "Have you always lived in Montana Territory?" she asked as they stopped to rest by a stream around midday. "Since I was 16, he replied, watching Buck splash in the shallow water. "Left home in Missouri after my pa died. Wasn't much keeping me there." "And you came all this way alone?" "That must have been frightening," he shrugged. "Wasn't thinking much about being scared, just needed to go somewhere new." He glanced at her. "What about you? Always lived in Helena?" "Yes. My father moved there with my mother before I was born. He said it was a good place to put down roots, with the gold rushes bringing so many people through." She sighed. "The mercantile did well for many years, until it didn't." "Times change," Xavier observed. "Gotta change with them or get left behind." Lillian considered his words. "Is that what you did? Changed with the times?" "Tried to. Not always successful." He offered her a hand up from her seat on a fallen log. "We should keep moving if we want to reach the Riverside Ranch by sundown." As they continued their journey, Lillian found herself studying Xavier when he wasn't looking. There was something compelling about his quiet strength, the way he moved through the world with purpose, but without aggression. So different from Thomas, who had always been concerned with appearances and social standing. The Riverside Ranch appeared in the distance as the sun began its descent, a sprawling property with a large main house, several outbuildings, and vast pastures dotted with cattle. As they approached, a man on horseback rode out to meet them. "That's Frank Donovan, the foreman," Xavier explained. "Good man." Frank was a weathered cowboy in his 40s who greeted Xavier warmly before turning curious eyes to Lillian. "This the teacher you mentioned in your message?" he asked. "This is Miss Lillian Evans," Xavier confirmed. "Miss Evans, Frank Donovan." "Pleasure, madam," Frank said, tipping his hat. "Boss is eager to meet you, been trying to find someone suitable for months now." Lillian straightened her shoulders, determined to make a good impression despite her circumstances. "I look forward to meeting him as well." The main house was impressive 2 stories of solid construction with a wide porch and actual glass windows. The owner, James Preston, was a barrel-chested man with a booming voice and a surprisingly gentle manner. His wife, Eleanor, welcomed Lillian with genuine warmth. 7 children between the ranch families, Eleanor explained as she showed Lillian to a small but comfortable room in the main house. Ages 6 to 12. They've had sporadic schooling at best. We have books, slates, and we've converted one of the storage buildings into a proper classroom. "It sounds wonderful," Lillian said sincerely. "When would you like me to begin?" "Monday would be fine." "Gives you a couple of days to settle in." Eleanor hesitated. "Xavier mentioned your recent difficulties. I want you to know you're welcome here for as long as you wish to stay." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. "Thank you. Your kindness means more than I can express." When she rejoined the others downstairs, Xavier was preparing to leave. The sight gave her a strange pang of disappointment. "You're not staying?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Got work to finish at home," he explained. "But I'm not far, 8 miles east." Preston clapped a hand on Xavier's shoulder. "You'll join us for Sunday dinner, won't you? Bring those hound puppies you mentioned. My boy's been pestering me about them." "I'll be here," Xavier agreed, his eyes meeting Lillian's briefly, "if that's all right with everyone." "Of course," Eleanor said warmly. "We always have room for one more." Outside, as Xavier prepared to leave, Lillian followed him to his horse. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You've saved me in every way that matters." He adjusted his saddle, not meeting her eyes. "You'd have found your way. I'm not so sure about that." She reached out impulsively, touching his arm. "Will you really come on Sunday?" Now he looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Said I would, didn't I?" She nodded, dropping her hand. "Safe travels, Miss Evans." He tipped his hat, then mounted his horse in one fluid motion. "Till Sunday." Lillian watched him ride away, a curious mixture of emotions swirling within her. Just 2 days ago, she had been prepared to marry a man she didn't love out of desperation. Now, she found herself standing on the threshold of a new life, and thinking far too much about a quiet cowboy with kind eyes and gentle hands. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity as Lillian settled into life at Riverside Ranch. Eleanor Preston proved to be a godsend, helping her prepare lessons for the children and lending her clothing until her meager belongings could be retrieved from Helena. James Preston sent 2 ranch hands to collect her things, returning with the news that her former fiancé had already arranged to purchase her father's store at a fraction of its worth. "Vultures circle quickly," James commented when he relayed the information. "But don't you worry, Miss Evans. You have a place here as long as you want it." By Sunday, Lillian had begun to feel almost at home. The ranch was a bustling community unto itself, with various families living in smaller cabins scattered across the property. The children she would be teaching were curious and lively, if a bit wild, and she found herself looking forward to the challenge of educating them. When Xavier arrived for dinner, leading a horse with a box containing 3 squirming puppies, Lillian was surprised by how her heart leapt at the sight of him. He had cleaned up for the occasion, shaved, trimmed his hair, and wore a clean shirt under his vest. He looked different but still essentially himself. "Miss Evans," he greeted her with a tip of his hat. "Hope you're settling in well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, smiling. "I see you've brought the promised puppies." "A man keeps his word," he said simply. Preston's son, 10-year-old Daniel, came rushing out to see the puppies, followed closely by several other children. Xavier showed remarkable patience with them, explaining how to handle the pups gently and answering their rapid-fire questions. Dinner was a lively affair, with 18 people crowded around the long table in the main house's dining room. Lillian found herself seated beside Xavier, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they passed dishes. Each contact sent a small thrill through her that she tried desperately to ignore. "You're quiet tonight," he observed softly as the meal progressed. "Just taking it all in," she replied. "It's been an eventful few days." Having second thoughts, she shook her head. "No, quite the opposite. I feel like I've found where I'm supposed to be." Something in his eyes softened. "Good. That's good." After dinner, while the children played with the puppies under Alina's supervision and the men gathered for cigars on the porch, Lillian slipped away to the garden behind the house. The evening was mild, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She breathed deeply, savoring the scent of earth and growing things. "Mind some company?" Xavier's voice came from behind her. She turned, smiling. "Not at all." He joined her, hands in his pockets. For a moment they simply stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said finally. "I don't think I properly expressed my gratitude." "No need," he replied. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she countered gently. "They wouldn't have. Most would have ridden past and left me to my misery." He shifted, clearly uncomfortable with her praise. "Been thinking," he said, changing the subject. "If you want to visit your pa's grave sometime, I'd be happy to take you. It's not right, you being kept from saying proper goodbyes." Tears welled in her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the offer. "I would appreciate that very much." He nodded, then reached into his pocket. "Almost forgot, brought you something." He held out a small wooden carving of a bird, a sparrow, delicately crafted with wings outspread as if in flight. "Did you make this?" she asked, taking it carefully. "Helps pass the winter evenings," he admitted. "Nothing fancy." "It's beautiful," she said sincerely, running her finger over the smooth wood. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Two people who had known loss, now standing together under the vast Montana sky. The moment was broken by Daniel's excited voice calling for Xavier to come see which puppy he'd chosen. With a small smile and another tip of his hat, Xavier left her in the garden, the wooden bird warm in her palm. Over the next few weeks, as Lillian threw herself into teaching, Xavier became a regular visitor to Riverside Ranch. Sometimes he brought game for the kitchen or helped with ranch work. Other times he simply appeared for Sunday dinners. Each visit left Lillian more certain of her growing feelings for him, though she kept them carefully guarded. One Saturday in late June, true to his word, Xavier arrived to take her to Helena to visit her father's grave. The journey was peaceful, with Lillian riding her own horse, this time a gentle mare lent to her by Alina Preston. "You ride well," Xavier commented as they traveled side by side. "My father taught me when I was young," she explained. "We used to go on picnics outside town before he got too busy with the store." At the cemetery, Xavier respectfully kept his distance while Lillian knelt beside her father's grave, now marked with a proper headstone she had commissioned with her first month's wages. She spoke softly to the stone, telling her father about her new life, her students, and with a glance back at the patient cowboy waiting by the horses about Xavier. "I think you would have liked him, Papa," she whispered. "He's nothing like Thomas. He's real solid. When he gives his word, he keeps it." Afterward, Xavier surprised her by suggesting they visit the graves of his wife and daughter. Standing before the simple markers, he told her about Sarah, her laugh, her skill with needle and thread, how she could sing like an angel but couldn't cook worth a damn. And about little Emma, who had lived just long enough to smile and grab her father's finger with surprising strength. "Sometimes I wonder what she'd be like now," he said quietly. "She'd be 7 this year." Lillian slipped her hand into his, a gesture of simple comfort that seemed to bridge the final distance between them. He squeezed her fingers gently, and they stood together in silence until the afternoon shadows began to lengthen. On the ride back to Riverside, they stopped to rest by a stream. Sitting on the grassy bank, Lillian found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Do you think it's possible to find love twice in one lifetime?" Xavier looked at her sharply, then away across the water. Used to think not, he admitted. Felt like betrayal to even consider it. And now, she prompted softly. Now I think maybe the heart's got more room than we give it credit for. He plucked a stem of grass, twisting it between his fingers. Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to be alone forever. She'd have kicked my behind for wasting so many years already. Lillian smiled at the image. She sounds like she was quite a woman. She was. He looked directly at her then. She'd have liked you, I think. You've got the same kind of spirit. The comment warmed her through. I'll take that as high praise. As summer progressed into fall, Lillian's life settled into a rhythm that brought her more satisfaction than she had ever known. Her students were thriving, the ranch community had embraced her, and Xavier. Xavier had become the center of her thoughts, though she struggled to define exactly what existed between them. They had developed a tradition of Sunday afternoon walks after dinner, sometimes talking for hours, other times content in shared silence. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, his travels west as a young man, his years working cattle drives before settling in Montana territory. He learned about her dreams of perhaps someday having a school of her own, her love of poetry, her fear of thunderstorms stemming from a childhood incident. Have you heard from Thomas? He asked one crisp October afternoon as they walked along the river that gave the ranch its name. A letter came last week, she admitted. Alina forwarded it from Helena. Xavier's jaw tightened. What did he want? To explain himself, to say he'd made a mistake. She shook her head. He heard I'm teaching at Riverside now. Apparently that makes me more acceptable being associated with the Prestons. And what did you tell him? His voice was carefully neutral. Nothing. I burned the letter. She stopped walking, turning to face him. That part of my life is over, X. I'm not interested in going backward. Relief flickered across his features, quickly masked. Good decision. Man shows his true character when things get difficult. Yes, he does, she agreed, her gaze steady on his face. Some men run away, others stand in the rain beside a weeping bride until she smiles again. His eyes widened slightly at her words, recognition of that first meeting coloring his expression. Lillian, I've never thanked you properly for that day, she continued. Not just for the practical help, but for standing with me, for seeing me at my worst and offering kindness anyway. He swallowed, emotion plain on his face. Wasn't your worst, was just your most honest. Perhaps. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I've come to care for you, X, very deeply. I know it might be too soon, or you might not feel the same way, but I do, he interrupted, his voice rough. God help me, I do feel the same, have for months now. Joy bloomed within her. Then why have you never said anything? Didn't want you to feel obligated. You were vulnerable when we met, needed a friend more than anything else. He ran a hand through his hair. And I wasn't sure I had the right, after Sarah and Emma. Took me a long time to believe I deserved another chance. Lillian stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. We've both lost people we loved. That doesn't mean we have to stop living. No, he agreed softly. It doesn't. When he finally kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Lillian leaned into him, her hands finding his shoulders as his came to rest at her waist. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving between them like morning mist under the sun. I love you, he whispered against her lips when they finally parted. Have since I found you in that cemetery, I think. I love you too, she replied, the words falling easily from her lips. Enough to make me believe everything that happened led me where I was meant to be. They were married on a bright spring day the following April, in the small church that had been built on Riverside Ranch over the winter. Alina stood with Lillian, while Frank Donovan stood with Xavier. The ranch children scattered wildflowers along the aisle, and Buck, now an elder statesman among the ranch dogs, wore a special collar for the occasion. After the ceremony, as guests gathered for the celebration, Xavier led Lillian away for a moment of privacy behind the church. Happy? He asked, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her wrists. More than I knew was possible, she answered honestly. And you, same, he pressed his forehead to hers. Never thought I'd be standing here again making these promises to someone, but they feel right with you, feel true. They are true, she assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. This is just the beginning, X. We have so much life ahead of us. That we do, Mrs. Young, he agreed, a smile spreading across his face. That we do. 5 years later, Lillian stood on the porch of their home, a sturdy cabin Xavier had built on land adjoining Riverside Ranch, where she still taught the growing number of children. Inside, their 3-year-old daughter, Sarah Aliner, was being entertained by her father and Buck, their laughter drifting through the open window. Lillian's hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the strong kicks of the child who would join their family in just a few months. Xavier came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just remembering," she replied, leaning into his strength. "How different everything could have been if you hadn't stopped that day in the cemetery." "Wasn't chance," he said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Lillian smiled up at her husband, the cowboy who had stood beside her in the rain until she smiled, and who hadn't stopped making her smile since. "Yes," she agreed, her heart full to bursting with gratitude and love. "Some things are definitely meant to be."